To get started for today, we are going to finish up our dress demonstration. So we're going to use that narrow or that rolled hem technique that we did in our notebook to hem the dress, and then we'll also hand stitch on our buttons. So I'll switch over to my other camera and we'll go ahead and get started. Over here, I've got almost my complete dress done, but the last two steps we just mentioned are the hem and the buttons that we need to do. So to start with the hem, we are going to do that technique, the narrow or the rolled hem that we did in our notebook. And the first step to that is putting in that basting stitch at 1/8 of an inch to act as our guide for folding up and pressing this hem. So I'm going to take this back to my sewing machine and go ahead and put in that basting stitch first. Okay, over here, I'm going to up my stitch length to a 4.0 for that basting. And then we'll go ahead and just start at one of our side seams and baste 1/8 of an inch all the way around. So no need for back stitch. And it's very important to get this first basting the right width and a consistent width, because that will help you have a consistent width on your final hem. So if you've had that issue where you've gotten feedback from your notebook that your hem widths are not consistent, make sure that you really get a consistent 1/8 of an inch on this first step, and that will help you. Okay, let's head over to our ironing board and we'll go ahead and start pressing this up. Here, I'm going to cut off those little thread tails from the stitch lines that I just did so those don't get in the way as I'm trying to press. And now I'm going to look at the inside of my fabric, so wrong side of the fabric, and I'm going to begin pressing up that raw edge of my hem right on that guideline that we just stitched. So fold it up, and we're going to press it towards the wrong side of our fabric once, and then we'll go around a second time and do the same step again. Okay, so that was one full rotation. Now I'm going to begin pressing it up for that second time. And when we do it this second time, we're going to use that raw edge of our fabric as our guide. So fold it right where that raw edge is and press it up a second time. And this time I'm going to begin putting pins in. So I want to do that on the right side of the fabric since that's where we'll be stitching from. So I'm just going to turn it to that right side and pin through. And I'm just going parallel to the hem because this is so narrow, it's very difficult to get them perpendicular. Fabric is so hot. Okay, so that is my full hem pressed. Just fixing this one pin because it was coming unfolded. Right there on the seam. Okay, so now we are going to go from the right side of the fabric. We are going to top stitch this down at 1/8 inch. Okay, so I'm going to start at my side seam. And I need to push my stitch length back down to a 2.5 before I begin. And then line up that folded edge with my 1/8 inch marking, and we're just going to top stitch around the full hem. You may have to help it kind of get over that hump where the seam is. It gets bulky, so you may have to kind of help it in the back so it goes over that hump. And as always, make sure that you connect those back stitches. So you can see right here where those connected together to make that full circle. Okay, let's take this back over to our ironing board. At this point, you want to trim any threads that may be hanging off of your dress, inside and outside. So I'm going to trim these that I just stitched with. I want to remove that basting anywhere that it's visible. So right here, you can see where it's visible on that edge. I want to remove that basting anywhere that it's visible. Give my hem another good press. And then on the inside of my dress, I'm going to go through and remove any threads that are hanging off. So these are kind of raw edge threads of my fabric, or any, I think I saw some earlier where I have little thread tails. You want to make sure that you clean up the inside and outside of your dress, not just the outside. So make sure that you go through and you clean all of that up before you continue on. Okay, I'll move on just for efficiency, but make sure you get that all cleaned up. The last step we have is to do our buttons on the back. So as I mark these buttons, I'm going to do, the top two are going to be functional buttons. The bottom one, since I made that pattern mistake whenever I was patterning this dress where I wasn't accounting for that 1/4 inch top stitch and it ended up going through our buttonhole, we're going to make that very last button a faux button. So we're just going to kind of stitch it right on top, and it's not really going to be a functional button. It'll just be decorative. But these top two, we do need to be functional so that our person can actually get into the garment. So I'll stitch that faux one first, and then I'll show you how to stitch one of the functional ones. So for our buttons, if you look at our pattern, back to our original bodice pattern, the drill holes for the buttons are right in the center of the button hole, or the I shape. So that I shape is for the hole. The drill hole in the center is for button placement. So if I fold back on that fold line and then get this left-hand side out of the way, line it up with that right-hand side, I'm going to use my awl to punch through those drill holes to mark where the center of my button should go. Okay, those top two you're going to mark on this right-hand side. And then the third one, since it's going to just sit on top, we can go ahead and let those plackets, those button areas, sit one right on top of the other, and then mark it on top of the actual buttonhole, since this one's just going to sit on top. Okay. Now I'm going to get my needle and thread. Make sure that the ends of your thread are even with each other. So I've got two ends right there, even with each other. That way I'm always stitching with 2 layers of thread. For this bottom one, I'm going to put my hand in between the layers because I don't want to accidentally stitch all the way through the front of my dress. So I'm going to stick my hand in between those layers to make sure that I'm only going through the back. But for this one, we're going to go through both layers of the back, the left and the right. So I'm going to start right here at the very center where that drill hole was, and I'm going to stitch in place a couple of times just to begin tying it off. It's kind of thick, so it may take some effort to get your needle through there. Okay, now I can grab my button. And for this one, we don't have to put that spacer in there again, because this is just going to be a faux button for decoration, not really functional. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch it flat down to the surface.
Like I said, this is thick, so it's giving me some trouble getting through all those layers. There we go. Okay, and if you have a 2-hole button, you can just go back and forth between those 2 holes. I want you to do that anywhere from 6 to 10 times. You want to make sure that this is really durable and that your button won't, the thread won't break and your button won't fall off easily. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and do 3 times, just again to save us some time. And for this one, again, we don't need that gap in between, so we don't have to create our shank where we wrap it around. We're just going to go onto the back of the fabric and stitch in place to tie it off. And I've got some thread tails hanging out here from one of my other stitch lines. Get those off as well while I'm at it. Okay, next one. For our actual functional buttons, we need to first cut open our buttonholes. So there's 2 different ways you can do this. The first one is the way that I showed you for our notebook. You take 2 pins, go through either end of the buttonhole as kind of a stopper to make sure that you don't cut too far. And then you can use your seam ripper to cut through the center. Okay, so that's one way. The other way is to fold it in half. Take a tiny little snip out of the center and then use your scissors to cut out to the edges. But again, make sure not to cut too far. You don't want to cut through any of that stitching. So whichever way you're more comfortable with, you're welcome to use. Okay, I'm going to check the placement of those drill holes because those drill holes should be in the right place if you put your buttonholes in the right place. So right now, before I put my buttons on, I'm just going to double check by lining up my plackets. So if you kind of fold back this top, that zigzag raw edge here should line up with the folded edge of the other one so that they're right on top of each other. And then I'm going to put a pin right through the center of my buttonhole. And it should come out where the drill hole is. So if that's correct, then your drill hole is in the right spot. If not, if your buttonhole was a little bit off, it's very important that your buttons line up with your buttonholes. So you may change the placement of your drill hole a little bit to line up with your buttonhole. Okay, so both of those are lining up. So now I'm going to use that drill hole, and this time I'm only stitching through this right-hand side of my dress. And again, I'm going to start with a little stitch in place right where that drill hole is. That's where the center of my button should go. Grab my button, and this time, because this is a functional one, we need that spacer. So I'm going to use a toothpick as a spacer. Go ahead and go through your button. And then before you pull it fully tight, make sure to put your spacer in there. There we go. And so now I can stitch through, again, going through 6 to 8 times to make sure that this is durable enough and that those threads are not going to be weak and break soon. Try to keep your stitching on the back as clean as it looks on the front. So always go in and out of the same spot that you did the first time. Okay, on the last stitch, you're going to go up to the surface, but do not go through your button. So you can see there where I came up to the surface, but I did not go through my actual button. At this point, I can take my spacer out and now hold that button off the surface of the fabric and wrap your thread around to stiffen that gap that your spacer created. And now I can go back down to the back of the fabric and stitch in place to tie it off. Okay, so now that button should fit right through your buttonhole. And you should have a functional button on the back of your garment. And the fabric, if you've placed your buttons and your buttonholes in the proper place, then the fabric in between should lay flat. It shouldn't be gapping up. I shouldn't have a gap in between those two layers. So make sure that you get that buttonhole and button placement properly on there so that you have all of your fabric in between laying flat, okay? I'll let y'all go ahead and do that last one using the same procedure that we did for this middle one. Are there any questions about the hem or about putting on your 3 buttons? Okay, so very last step is just going to be ironing this, making sure that you get all of the wrinkles out. If you're having a hard time getting wrinkles out, I like to use steam from your iron or even spray water. If you have a spray bottle, you can kind of spritz a very light spritz of water on your fabric and then iron it. That typically helps get out a lot of creases. And then if neither of those work, then you can also try starch, and you can get that from just Walmart or Target or wherever, typically in the laundry area, but you can starch your fabric and that can help get out any wrinkles as well. And then of course, make sure to trim all your threads before you photograph your dress.